When a woman withdraws her energy, men begin to fear her. Carl Jung. You would be surprised if I told you that the moment a woman withdraws her energy, the world around her begins to tremble. Not because she yells. Not because she fights. But because silence, her silence, becomes louder than any demand for love ever could. It is in that silence that the masculine begins to feel something primal, fear. Not the fear of punishment, but the fear of recognition, the fear of seeing himself without the mirror she once held for him. A woman's energy is not merely affection or warmth. It is the psychic field that animates the world of a man. It is the invisible current that gives life to his confidence, that affirms his sense of worth, that shields him from his own emptiness. When she loves, she pours this energy into him like a river feeding a barren valley. But when that river retracts, when her waters dry up and she no longer feeds his reflection, the man is left alone with the desert of his own soul. Carl Jung once wrote that what we do not make conscious will appear in our lives as fate. When a woman withdraws her energy, what was unconscious in a man, his dependence on her validation, suddenly becomes visible. He begins to see the shadow of his own need, the hunger he masked with pride, the insecurity he disguised as dominance. And it terrifies him. For the first time, he meets his own reflection not in her loving eyes, but in the cold emptiness of her absence. This is not revenge. This is transformation. The woman who withdraws her energy is not punishing, she is awakening. She begins to remember that her worth is not a performance, not something to be proven by how much she gives or how deeply she endures. Her withdrawal is sacred. It is the calling back of her soul from the places it was never meant to live permanently. It is her reclaiming of psychic territory that had been leased out to the unworthy. Most men do not understand what is happening in this moment. They confuse the withdrawal of energy with rejection. But they are wrong. She is not rejecting him, she is detaching from illusion. She no longer invests in the fantasy of potential, no longer worships at the altar of what could be. Jung would call this individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole, no longer defined by external attachments or archetypal projections. For so long, she was the anima, the muse, the nurturer, the redeemer of the broken masculine. In her unconscious, she believed her love could heal, her patience could change, her empathy could save. But every act of self-abandonment in the name of love is a quiet betrayal of the soul. And so, the moment she withdraws her energy is the moment she breaks that ancient spell. She ceases to play the role of savior and begins to embody the sovereign. A man may chase her shadow. He may try to win back what he feels slipping away, not because he loves her essence, but because he fears the void her absence reveals within himself. That is the paradox. He did not value her when she was giving, but he begins to ache for her when she is gone. The loss of her energy forces him to confront the archetype of the abandoned self, the boy who was once unseen, who sought validation through conquest and control. And she, standing at the threshold of her own awakening, begins to see everything with clarity. The games. The patterns. The subtle manipulations disguised as affection. She recognizes that she was never asking too much, she was simply giving too much to someone incapable of reciprocity. Her detachment is not coldness, it is a sign that her consciousness has risen beyond the vibration of begging to be seen. When a woman's energy retreats, she does not shrink, she expands inward. Her silence is not emptiness, it is integration. She meets her shadow, the parts of her that once feared loneliness, rejection, and abandonment. And in that meeting, she realizes that solitude is not punishment, it is the initiation of the soul. In Jungian terms, she has entered the sacred process of individuation, where the fragments of her psyche begin to unite. The man, meanwhile, is faced with his own reckoning. Without her light reflecting his image, he must confront his darkness alone. Some will run, from the pain, from themselves, from the lesson. Others will crumble, unable to face the weight of their own dependency. But a few will awaken. They will see that her withdrawal was not cruelty, it was a mirror. It forced them to see what they had projected onto her, their unhealed wounds, their mother complex, their fear of the feminine as both nurturing and destroying. In this alchemy of detachment, something magnificent occurs. The woman who withdraws her energy begins to radiate a different frequency, calm, unbothered, magnetic. Her value no longer seeks acknowledgement, it simply is. The more she stands in this energy, the more those who once took her for granted begin to feel the loss. Not because she withheld love, but because she withdrew the illusion that love could be earned by suffering. He begins to feel her absence not as a simple loss, but as a haunting. The echo of her energy lingers in his psyche like a ghost that refuses to leave. Every moment he once took for granted, her laughter, her softness, the quiet way she understood his silence, returns to him distorted, magnified, charged with the weight of his own neglect. He cannot name this feeling, for it is not grief alone. It is confrontation. It is the collapse of the illusion that he was ever in control. When a woman withdraws her energy, a man is forced into his own underworld. It is a descent similar to that of Orpheus searching for Eurydice, only this time, he cannot bring her back, for she no longer belongs to his world. She has crossed the threshold into her sovereignty, and he is left standing at the gates of his own unconscious, unsure whether to enter or flee. This is the archetypal moment Jung spoke of, when the anima, the feminine within the man, withdraws her light, compelling him to awaken from his spiritual slumber. But few men accept this invitation. The majority resist it, seeking instead to reclaim the external woman, rather than confront the internal wound. They chase, they plead, they perform grand gestures, not from love, but from the terror of losing their emotional anchor. They do not yet understand that what they truly fear is not her absence, but their own emptiness. And yet, for the woman, this is not an act of pride. It is an act of survival. Her withdrawal is not about revenge or punishment, it is about preservation of essence. After all, energy is sacred currency. To give it endlessly to someone who misuses it is to impoverish the soul. The more she poured into him, the more he fed on it unconsciously, mistaking her giving for a guarantee of his power. Now, as she reclaims that energy, his false self begins to wither. There is a strange beauty in this dynamic, a painful but necessary dance between the anima and the animus, the eternal feminine and the wounded masculine. For centuries, women have been taught to give unconditionally, to hold emotional space for others even as their own spirits crumble. But in this new consciousness, she learns that withholding is not cruelty, it is clarity. The moment she stops overfunctioning for those who underdeliver, her life begins to rebalance itself. The silence that follows her withdrawal is not empty, it hums with power. It is the kind of silence that forces truth to surface. In that stillness, the man begins to see his own projections unravel. He realizes that what he loved was not her authentic self, but the reflection of his unmet needs. Her withdrawal strips him of illusion, and in its place, he encounters something raw and unfiltered, himself. This confrontation is what Jung would call shadow integration. Without the mirror of her energy, his ego begins to fracture, exposing the hidden patterns beneath his charm and his pride, the wounds of the boy who learned to perform for love, to manipulate for attention, to fear intimacy even as he craves it. He starts to understand that his dominance was never strength, it was armor. His indifference was not confidence, it was fear wearing a mask. For the woman, this withdrawal marks her initiation into a higher form of consciousness. She begins to feel her own energy returning home to her body. The same vitality she once used to nurture him now feeds her creativity, her peace, her purpose. The world that once revolved around his moods and reactions begins to dissolve. In its place rises something serene and unshakable, a grounded self that no longer seeks validation. In Jungian psychology, this is the movement from projection to integration. She is no longer projecting her inner masculine, her desire for security, recognition, or rescue, onto him. Instead, she begins to cultivate those qualities within herself. Her animus, once externalized in the form of a man she wanted to fix, now becomes an inner source of strength, discipline, and vision. She becomes whole unto herself. Meanwhile, the man who once fed on her energy begins to lose his equilibrium. He cannot understand why the same words, gestures, and manipulations no longer work. It is because he is no longer dealing with the same woman. The version of her that tolerated half love and emotional crumbs no longer exists. She has undergone a psychic death, a shedding of illusion, and what remains is pure essence. Her withdrawal becomes a mirror through which he can either evolve or regress. Some will awaken, learning to meet her not from dependency but from wholeness. Others will turn bitter, demonizing her newfound power as arrogance. But in truth, what they call arrogance is simply sovereignty, the refusal to dilute oneself to be loved. And so, when a woman withdraws her energy, the masculine begins to tremble not because she has left, but because she has transcended. The dynamics of power have shifted. What once was unconscious is now illuminated. Her detachment exposes the emotional architecture of the relationship, the scaffolding of control, projection, and need. And in that revelation, something sacred occurs. Both are given the opportunity to meet themselves for the first time. The woman who once nurtured without measure now becomes the embodiment of discernment. She no longer gives by impulse, nor does she confuse compassion with self-abandonment. Her heart still beats with tenderness, but that tenderness is now guided by wisdom, a wisdom born from pain, silence, and self-realization. This is the sacred turning point of her evolution, the transformation from emotional servitude to spiritual sovereignty. In Jungian language, this is the union of the conscious and the unconscious. For so long, she was driven by unconscious patterns, ancestral conditioning, childhood wounds, the inherited belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. But once her energy is withdrawn, these patterns surface like fragments of a dream. She begins to see clearly the generational scripts that told her she must shrink so others can shine, or endure mistreatment under the banner of unconditional love. Now, she no longer plays those roles. She becomes both observer and alchemist. She witnesses the inner child who begged to be chosen and whispers to her, "You were always enough." The moment she internalizes that truth, her entire vibration changes. She no longer chases, negotiates, or explains. Her silence becomes her protection, her boundaries her temple. Men who encounter her after this transformation sense something different. They cannot easily categorize her. She doesn't fit into their old patterns of conquest or control. Her energy feels both magnetic and untouchable. It draws them and yet humbles them. The unconscious masculine, which once sought dominance, now feels small before such grounded power. Some will be intimidated. Others will be inspired. But none will remain unchanged. Carl Jung taught that what we repress in the unconscious will eventually confront us in symbolic form. For the man, her withdrawal is that symbol, the physical manifestation of every ignored emotion, every dismissed truth, every woman he took for granted. Her absence becomes his initiation into awareness. It is the first time he must sit with discomfort rather than outsource healing to someone else's devotion. He starts to see her not just as a woman, but as an archetype, the embodiment of the great mother and the sacred feminine he has unconsciously feared. Her absence exposes how deeply he has depended on feminine energy to regulate his emotional instability. Without her, he feels the weight of his unhealed anima, the feminine aspect within himself that he neglected, mocked, or silenced. This internal void can either destroy him or awaken him. If he resists it, he will seek another woman to fill the space, repeating the same karmic cycle of need and neglect. But if he faces it, if he dares to meet the darkness she reflected back to him, he can begin his own process of individuation. He can learn to cultivate his inner feminine, to listen, to feel, to nurture without control. Only then does he evolve from boyhood to true manhood. Meanwhile, she continues to rise in silence. Not above him, but beyond him. Her energy now moves differently, steady, intentional, aligned with purpose. She channels it into art, into solitude, into creation. She no longer seeks relationships to feel alive, her aliveness radiates from within. This is what terrifies men who are still unconscious, her capacity to exist without their validation. Her very presence becomes a mirror that exposes the weakness of those who rely on dominance to feel powerful. They mistake her calmness for arrogance because they cannot comprehend freedom without control. But she no longer explains herself. The need to be understood is another form of bondage, and she has outgrown that too. There's something ineffably magnetic about a woman who has withdrawn her energy. It's not that she withholds love, it's that she embodies love in a form that no longer seeks to be possessed. The frequency of her being says, I am whole. I am here, but not for your taking. And this vibration, paradoxically, draws more toward her than when she was desperately trying to prove her worth. In the cosmic balance, this withdrawal serves a higher function. It restores equilibrium. When a woman pulls her energy back, the universe rearranges itself around her new center of gravity. The people, situations, and relationships that once fed on her light begin to fall away. It may look like loss, but it is purification. She is shedding what cannot meet her new frequency. And somewhere deep within, the man who once thrived on her giving begins to understand something profound. Love is not consumption. It is presence. It is reverence. It is the meeting of two sovereign beings who choose, not out of need, but out of truth. But that realization comes too late for many. For by the time he understands what her withdrawal meant, she has already transmuted her pain into power. The old self that tolerated emotional chaos has died. In its place stands a woman who no longer seeks validation from the wounded masculine, but instead mirrors back his potential for growth, if he dares to rise. And as she walks away from the battlefield of unbalanced love, she carries no bitterness, only clarity. The silence that once felt heavy now hums like sacred music within her. The stillness of solitude becomes her cathedral, and her energy, once scattered across the lives of others, now moves in perfect rhythm with her own becoming. There comes a moment in every awakened woman's life when she no longer recognizes the version of herself that once begged to be seen. The woman who tolerated half-presence, who translated coldness into mystery, who mistook inconsistency for depth, she begins to fade like a ghost from another lifetime. What replaces her is something luminous, grounded, and serene. She no longer lives in reaction to others, she lives in devotion to her own wholeness. This is the sacred stillness Jung called the unio mystica, the mystical union that occurs when the conscious and unconscious finally embrace. She no longer divides herself into fragments trying to please, to fix, to prove. The same energy she once poured outward now flows inward, feeding her intuition, creativity, and intuition. The fire that once burned to keep others warm becomes a soft flame illuminating her inner temple. Men feel this change instinctively. Those who once thrived on her availability now sense a threshold they cannot cross. They can no longer access her through manipulation or charm, because her energy no longer vibrates in the frequency of need. She is not cold, she is clear. Her detachment is not cruelty, it is alignment. She has become the keeper of her own energy, and that terrifies the unconscious masculine more than rejection ever could. He begins to realize that what he called connection was often dependence. What he mistook for love was the comfort of her emotional labor. Her withdrawal reveals how much of his power relied on her giving. Without her energy regulating his emptiness, his ego loses its footing. He begins to see that dominance, validation, and pursuit were masks hiding his deeper wound, the fear of his own inadequacy. In that fear lies his chance at rebirth. But few accept it. It takes great courage for a man to meet himself without the mirror of the feminine. Jung understood this as the confrontation with the shadow, the part of the psyche that contains all that has been rejected, denied, or projected outward. Her withdrawal forces him into that confrontation. He must choose, evolve, or repeat. For the woman, this is liberation through solitude. The energy she once scattered across others now returns home like birds to their nest. She begins to feel a quiet strength pulsing through her veins, a sense of peace not dependent on being loved, noticed, or chosen. It is as if the universe itself breathes through her. She realizes that her sensitivity, once exploited, is her greatest gift, an instrument of discernment, not a burden to hide. As she deepens into this new self, she no longer romanticizes pain. The stories she once told herself, that suffering makes love real, that endurance equals devotion, dissolve under the light of awareness. She learns the art of detachment, not as avoidance, but as mastery. Detachment means she no longer confuses empathy with enmeshment, no longer allows her compassion to be weaponized against her. She can love deeply while remaining free. This evolution changes everything about how she moves in the world. Her presence slows time. Conversations become intentional. Relationships become sacred mirrors rather than emotional battlegrounds. She no longer chases closure, she creates it within. Her boundaries, once shaky, now feel like quiet rivers guiding the flow of her life. Those who align with her new vibration find peace beside her. Those who seek to drain her fade into the distance, unable to tolerate the frequency of her wholeness. The feminine energy she embodies is no longer chaotic or giving without measure. It is conscious, directional, divine. Jung would call this the integration of the anima in its mature form, the Sophia archetype, wisdom embodied through grace. She becomes both soft and strong, yielding yet unyielding, receptive yet self-possessed. Her power is no longer reactive, it simply is. For the masculine who dares to awaken, this new energy calls him higher. It demands the death of his egoic identity and the birth of his authentic self. To meet her, he must confront his wounds, his projections, his fear of vulnerability. Only then can he approach her not as a consumer of energy, but as a partner in consciousness. But whether he rises or falls is no longer her concern. Her journey is not about his evolution, it is about her return. And what does she return to? Herself. Her body, once tense with emotional labor, begins to relax. Her mind, once consumed by overthinking, finds quiet. She begins to experience presence, the state the Stoics spoke of as the only true freedom. Like Marcus Aurelius wrote, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. And now, her thoughts are her own. No longer shaped by rejection or desire, but by wisdom and stillness. She no longer needs the noise of validation because she has found the rhythm of self-respect. Her energy no longer rushes outward in desperation, it circulates inward, cleansing her spirit. Her silence becomes a language the world must learn to hear. Men feel it as mystery, women feel it as inspiration, and she feels it as home. When a woman reaches this state, she becomes untouchable in the most profound way, not unreachable, but immovable. Her peace cannot be stolen, her energy cannot be coerced, and her worth no longer fluctuates based on who sees it. She is, at last, complete. There is an unmistakable shift in the air around a woman who has withdrawn her energy. It is not loud. It does not announce itself with vengeance or spectacle. It is quiet, almost holy. Her presence feels different, as though something ancient has awakened within her. She has crossed the invisible threshold between being defined by love and becoming the embodiment of it. Her aura speaks a language the unawakened cannot interpret. I am no longer available to that which diminishes my soul. This state of being is not born from bitterness, but from revelation. Through the fire of heartbreak, disappointment, and exhaustion, she discovered something men and the world often fail to see, that her energy was never meant to be endlessly extracted. That her purpose was never to rescue those who refused to save themselves. That love, real love, cannot exist where self-betrayal is required. When she withdraws her energy, she becomes a mirror of cosmic law. The universe itself flows through her more purely because she no longer leaks her essence through attachment. She now understands what Jung meant when he said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Her withdrawal is not an act of avoidance, it is illumination. She has seen the shadow clearly, both in him and in herself, and chosen wholeness over illusion. The man, meanwhile, finds himself standing in unfamiliar silence. The absence of her energy exposes the parts of himself he spent a lifetime avoiding. Her withdrawal strips him bare. The persona he once wore, the confident, indifferent, self-assured mask, begins to crack under the weight of his own emptiness. In that space, he feels the echo of his dependency, the childlike fear of not being enough. This is his moment of truth. If he is brave, he will enter his own descent. He will face the buried emotions he projected onto her. He will realize that her energy once protected him from his own shadow. But if he resists, he will collapse into blame, resentment, or pursuit, anything to avoid the silence that now mirrors his inner void. The tragedy is that many never make it past this point. They look for her energy in others, only to find the same emptiness repeated in new forms. But she does not look back. The woman who withdraws her energy does not chase what is fading. She has learned the art of letting things die. Because she understands now that love without reciprocity is a slow form of self-erasure. To stay in spaces where she must beg to be understood is to participate in her own diminishment. So she chooses differently. Her choice terrifies the unhealed masculine because it reveals something he cannot control. Her power does not depend on external validation. She no longer seeks safety in attachment, and that makes her unpredictable in the eyes of those who once fed on her emotional labor. But this unpredictability is not chaos, it is freedom. It is the power of a woman who knows that her energy is her throne, not her cage. In this new embodiment, she radiates an energy both magnetic and serene. The kind of presence that bends the air without speaking. Her eyes no longer plead, they witness. Her silence no longer seeks explanation, it commands respect. Men feel it like gravity, subtle, irresistible, and humbling. They may not understand it consciously, but their psyches do. Deep down, the archetypal masculine recognizes the return of the queen. Her energy no longer flows toward proving or persuading. It simply is. It draws toward her those who can meet her in authenticity and repels those who cannot. She is no longer entangled in emotional games because she has risen above the frequency of drama. Her peace has become her boundary, and her dignity her crown. In Jungian terms, she has transcended the stage of projection entirely. She no longer projects her inner masculine outward, no longer looks for a man to complete her. The animus within her, the archetypal masculine energy, has matured. It now serves her purpose rather than sabotages it. It gives structure to her intuition, discipline to her creativity, and direction to her passion. She becomes both receptive and resolute, soft and immovable. And as she integrates these polarities, she steps into the archetype of the self, the totality of her being. She is no longer fragmented by past roles, the caregiver, the healer, the pleaser. She is all of them and none of them, moving through life with the calm assurance of someone who finally belongs to herself. Those who meet her now must rise to meet her energy. They cannot hide behind charm or strategy, for her intuition sees through facades with surgical precision. The superficial cannot survive near her vibration. What remains is truth, or nothing. And so, in her withdrawal, the world rearranges itself. The men who feared losing her energy begin to understand what they have truly lost, not a lover, but a mirror of their own potential. The people who took her kindness for weakness learn the quiet consequences of imbalance. And she, standing at the center of her reclaimed power, no longer mourns what was lost. She blesses it, releases it, and watches it dissolve into the horizon of her becoming. For the first time, she realizes that detachment does not mean indifference. It means love without ownership, compassion without sacrifice, presence without dependence. This is the highest form of love, the love born from consciousness. She moves through life now not seeking to be chosen, but to choose. Not begging to be seen, but seeing clearly. Not longing to be loved, but embodying love itself. And in that stillness, her soul whispers the truth that ends all searching. The woman who knows her worth does not chase, she chooses.